And we're back.
We're talking today about microdoses versus macro journeys using psilocybin mushroom medicine. A big topic, something that's very hot on the market right now. And let's dive right in.
Yeah, so I didn't even know what microdosing was before I knew what macrodosing was. I think like people's perspective around or perception around psychedelics is usually about macrodosing.
Yeah, and even if we take it back even before that, it's like a drug in our society. Mm-hmm. And my first experience with mushrooms in general was through the party scene. So I didn't have this other perspective of utilizing it as a medicine, which is ultimately what it is. So as I started exploring personally with different variations of environments and different ways to use it and what it means to consider it as a medicine, and what it brought me to was, well, first of all, learning about microdosing. And right now, there's a lot of research that is currently coming out. There is some that has been out already for a while in the industry. For medical professionals are doing a lot of clinical research right now, utilizing mushrooms for people that have been diagnosed with mainly PTSD, depression, and anxiety, while they're testing it on people that are also very healthy. So for me, I started off doing macro dosing, and what that means is having a bigger journey, having mushrooms that really create a psychedelic effect. Whereas microdosing is using the medicine in a very small amount. They say about 1/10 to 1/30 of the amount you would use for a macrodose. So that would be I use about 1.1 of a gram, so 100 milligrams. And I have been utilizing it about 4 times a week. Some people, depending on their information, are doing it 5 times a week. Some are doing it 3 or 2 times a week. So there's no real formula to it right now. So what I've been doing is 4 times a week. And when I first started, it was really exploration and research as well. So I was researching while also taking the microdoses myself. And I just started realizing the abundance of possibilities and help that it can provide. Now, for me, I had suffered with depression in the past, but at the point that I got to microdosing, I wasn't dealing with as much depression. So that wasn't exactly why I was using it, but it still provided an immense amount of benefits that I'll get into. But do you want to talk about how you started?
With microdosing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so with microdosing specifically, first I heard about it on, what is that channel? They do like documentaries, like TV documentaries. I can't remember. It's like Spike or something. I'm getting it wrong. Anyways, whatever. I first heard about like LSD microdosing, and I was curious about it, but I had never found like a source. So I didn't end up trying it until like 2 years later. And when I found microdosing, I was actually depressed. And so it wasn't me like seeking out the microdosing. It was my friend who was like, hey, by the way, I'm growing these mushrooms and I heard about this thing called microdosing. I had remembered that documentary. And so she gave me like fresh ones. They were like, I think they were Golden Teacher mushrooms, which is like the standard variety, B+ variety, right? Or maybe they're different. I don't know.
B+ and Golden Teacher are 2 different varieties, but they're both similar. That those are the most well known for microdosing.
Okay, so I tried with these fresh mushrooms because it was weird. We didn't even know how to dry them properly. She was growing them in Miami where it's super humid and they were having like a really hard time even growing them without getting mold on the grow. So when she had like a successful batch, she gave me like, just like 3 or 4 of them. And I wasn't measuring them because like how you were saying you would do like a 100, what is it, a tenth?
Yeah.
Okay, so I would just like cut off like a part of the cap and a part of the stem and just like take that and like hope for the best. So we would joke around because I would call one of our friends and be like, hey, I'm accidentally tripping right now because I was taking too much. Now, like the thing about microdosing, and we'll get into it a little bit more, is that you're not supposed to feel the psychedelic effect of it. I didn't realize that. So I kind of wanted to feel a little bit of the psychedelic effect of it, but I mean, I was only taking it for like maybe 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, she didn't give me a huge supply, but I had already started feeling a major difference. So I had to find another supplier because she was just kind of doing it as like a hobby, but I was feeling so different. Like, I mean, I don't know how different you could possibly feel in 3 weeks. And I'm like trying to take myself back to that experience where I was feeling different. And I just knew, I was like, oh my, I'm 3 weeks without imagining myself hanging myself. This is really super graphic, but like maybe we got to put a warning on this video. But like, it was just like eye-opening that I was in a space of just feeling okay. And I wasn't used to that. So I was like, I got to find more, right? So I found some through a friend of a friend in Miami, and her medicine was really reliable, which I didn't realize what that even meant back then, but it was super reliable. I was able to like do all of that arduous measuring and blah, blah, blah stuff myself, which is kind of annoying. Honestly, if like you can get it in a pill form, it's way better, or like pre-measured form, it's way better. So I was doing all that measurement stuff out myself, and I was doing about, the same amount as you, so 0.1. And probably same frequency, like every other day or every 2 days I would take one and then skip a day or 2 and then take 2, just like taking it kind of sporadically. But I went like, I don't know when it was really miraculous to me, probably around 3 months or 6 months, when I realized I hadn't hit a major cycle of depression in that amount of time, which was rare. Like that hadn't happened to me in years, because I would experience depression that was like 3 months long, where I would like be stuck to my bed or stuck to my couch and just like unable to get myself motivated to get up. Like I wasn't even sad. It was just like, I would experience it more like tiredness or lethargy or whatever the symptom is, right? But like as soon as I started with the microdosing, I haven't gone through one of those long bouts of depression again after that. And there have been some major like
life
changes in the past year for me. So,
and when was that when you first started?
That was like November of 2020, almost 2021.
So
November.
About a year and a half from now.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it was about 2 years ago when I really started getting into it, and I was doing a bunch of research. I'll actually leave some links below for different articles from medical professionals and what they have to say about how this medicine works. But in general, the microdoses is important to know that like the sweet spot is to not take enough to where you feel a psychedelic experience. This is not meant for psychedelic experience.
You gotta talk about what that means.
Yeah, so there's if you're feeling any shift at all in your consciousness, like you're like, ooh, you feel a little woozy, or
then you're accidentally tripping. That's what's happening.
Yeah, it's not. Basically, when you're microdosing, you're taking such a small amount that you're supposed to continue to be productive as though you didn't take anything. So it feels more like taking a vitamin, where you just take it and you just go about your day.
Okay, so some people be like, what's the point in that, though?
Yeah, and it happens all the time, actually. Yeah. You'll start, and what's happening is that your brain and your body are getting this medicine into your system, and without the psychedelic effect, you're still having effects on the brain and on the nervous system. So psilocybin in general, as you will research and read about, basically what it's doing is activating your neural network systems all across your brain. So we as adults generally are working off of our default modes, and as our brain goes through developmental years up until you're about 26 years old, your brain and your bodies become more efficient. So by efficient, it's basically there are so many connections in your brain when you're a child learning about your reality. And as you become an adult, your brain decides, okay, well, these are the networks and the connections that I utilize and that are habitual, so those become more stable. And then the other connections that have not been used at all, those start to maybe break away or disconnect, where you're not accessing all the connections that you have potential for in your brain. Which allows us, when we learn something or we come into an aha moment, you're like activating new neural connections. And so in general, we function as adults in this more efficient mode, so that you're not just using so much energy throughout the day. You're able to function in rituals and habits, habitual thoughts. And so this is why it lends itself to people that are dealing with PTSD or depression, where you have low energy and you're kind of just cycling through certain hamster wheels of thoughts, or even anxiety when you have triggers and you start spinning your wheels. And all of these metaphors that have been used really are talking to the default center, the default mode of functioning. So the psilocybin creates activity among opening a bunch of connections throughout your nervous system and your mind, which then allows you all of these opportunities to go into a different direction. And then it basically is experienced as having more aha moments, more realizations, the ability to be really flexible as well in the mind, whereas somebody that's dealing with maybe even like something like OCD, where it's like you have to have something the same way all the time, or even just regular functioning where you have hamster wheels of thought that you might be experiencing. And in a regular time, you may learn something and be like, oh man, this is a great realization, and this makes total sense. And then you go back into your regular day, and then you kind of go back into a default mode, and you're kind of disconnect from that learning, because that connection had not been stabilized and is not open unless it's practiced. So
I like to describe it as creative. And I want to explain creative, not in just a sense where you're going to want to go and paint. But creative as in, if you're in a default mode, you're not actually creating anything. You're kind of repeating something. Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's kind of just doing things the way that you've done them in the past. You're in autopilot. You know how sometimes you get into your car and you end up at the destination and you have no idea even what shoes you put on or how you got there, because your actions are actually put on an autopilot, so you're not wasting, what you were saying, you're not wasting that brain time, exhausting yourself and making new decisions. But when I think about describing what you're describing as just a creative process, in a creative process, it requires new neural pathways to be forming. You can't actually be in autopilot when you're in a creative mode.
Right, because you're going into something new.
Right.
And in fact, it also stimulates and activates the visual cortex of your brain as well, which is visualizing, imagination, dream world, things like that, so you can create new perceptions. So basically, with the bigger macro doses, you can experience this very viscerally, where you may see colors brighter and feel things more sensually, maybe smell, taste. All of your senses are receiving all of this information. and your brain is then translating it and you create your reality. So in a big dose, this becomes amplified tremendously, and you can have varying amounts of different types of experiences. And then with microdoses, you're getting the same medicine in your system, but you're not having the psychedelic effect, which means you're not walking around in dreamland while you have to go to work. And this is why...
So you're saying that you can take it while you go to work.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Microdosing is a form of taking it where you will be productive. And that's why you take it, and you don't feel the psychedelic effect. However, you are still getting this medicine into your system. So what that looks like after... Some people, after a few days or even after the first day, you can tell that there's maybe more flexibility in the brain. I had somebody describe it as the brain feeling more buttery soft. So and then after about a week, 2 weeks, and then 2 months, you start really seeing these overarching shifts where you're like, oh man, I can really tell that this is helping me. And for some people, they're getting better sleep at night because it's working with the serotonin receptors, which help with mood, so feeling good, and then also helping with sleep patterns. So even people with, I've had some associates that have had a lot of help with their sleep patterns while taking it as well, which if you sleep well and then wake up feeling good, you're more apt to have a really good day and then create a better reality for yourself by way of being able to see things differently and all the other things that unfold from that point of view.
And then, I mean, I even think about one of your integration clients who, like, in the very beginning, and it's not like we're talking, I don't know who this person is, right? I just want to, like, clear that up. Like, everything is confidential, integration and coaching and all of that stuff. But I just remember this particular client, you having, like, a challenging time helping this client through their breakthrough. But once they got through it, their breakthrough, and the reason why I'm calling it their breakthrough is because it doesn't seem like a breakthrough on microdoses because the shift is gradual, but it is incremental and it is exponential. It's kind of like you shift and change over a longer period of time, and then what happens is you just realize that you or this client of yours that you're helping to integrate, they're just different. The way that they're even talking to you is different now than it was when you first started talking to them, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, you start to become more flexible where things are not as hard to deal with that might have been habitually difficult and triggering. Where I also have another friend who was also on this microdose journey, and she has major PTSD, and the ability, PTSD in our society is incurable, and who knows if it's going to stay that way. But basically, if you think about the hamster wheel of thought where we have these default ways of functioning, well, so are triggering and trauma networks, right? So trauma is something that can be very isolated from other connections within your brain. So dealing with trauma can, once you're triggered and you're in it, you're really in it, and it takes way more than just thought work to get out of it. But with the microdoses or the psilocybin just in general, because it's activating so many other potentials, what it does is it doesn't take away your triggering event or your trauma. But what it does is it opens up other doorways to think about it, and that becomes a lot easier and smoother of a process. So without the psilocybin in your system, because these other connections aren't there, it causes a lot of stress on the brain to try to shift, or even thinking about changing habits, like deciding to exercise can be really difficult to just like continue to go into this new lifestyle, right? These lifestyle changes a lot of us try to make here or there, whether you're quitting something or starting up something new. Creating a new habit takes a lot of practice and effort, and there's days where you wake up and you just don't want to. And it really relieves that stress in the brain of like, there is no connection there. So in order to create one, you're pushing yourself to do it. And then it has to be practiced in order for that new connection to stabilize. It doesn't just say, okay, great, I'm open. Now I'm open for good. So with the psilocybin, what it does is it really like opens up these connections. So all you have to do is really travel through them without this added extra stress. So there's been people like
how does that stress show up in the brain? Like, I know you're saying like it's
frustration,
okay,
like triggers around for just really frustrating or feeling really depleted energetically because you're putting a lot of effort or utilizing your adrenaline to get something done as opposed to just natural life energy flowing easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like it's super relatable to think about it that way because it's like, you know, you've heard of like decision fatigue before. And when I think about like the brain being stressed out, it's like we realize that it's happening through maybe our emotions or the sensations that we feel, right?
Yeah.
So it's like your brain can, like in its functioning, in its better functioning, right? Even if we're just talking about like regular mushrooms like lion's mane, and
right.
we could talk about that too, right? Like taking things that just help your brain function
vitamin
better.
B12.
Yeah, vitamin B12.
Yeah.
You just feel more awake, more like present in your life because you have that available to you, right?
And that's what this journey truly is about at the end of the day, is your intention for yourself. You don't just take something to escape life. This actually plugs you more into life. Mm-hmm. And just like we were saying, she was saying the vitamins, lion's mane, reishi mushrooms, there's a bunch of mushrooms in the market that are really supportive and helpful for your overall wellness. And if you really want wellness, you can get it. And through these plant medicines, and including the psychedelic ones, obviously with the right type of framework around it so that you can use it properly, there's just an immense amount of potential. And that's really what it comes down to, is the potential to be able to create whatever you want, reprogram yourself, reprogram your subconscious, rather than doing 10 years worth of mantras and hoping that you believe whatever that mantra is at the end of the day. All of that stuff, really helpful. Breath work, helpful. Hypnosis, helpful. All of these modalities, any kind of healing modality, they're all helpful. And if you're adding another modality such as plant medicine, this is really a soft, gentle medicine that I've experienced compared to some of the others that can feel a little bit more rigid, and especially with the microdosing.
I was going to say, like, I think for all of those watching who are just on the fence because of that, the idea of what mushrooms are and like what they've been portrayed as in, like, you know, the media or in our culture
or the law
yeah. Or the law.
Yeah.
It's like we're afraid of it, you know? And so like to talk about it in a way of you have access to experiencing it and its benefits through something like microdosing can really help like ease people's nerves about
for sure. Yeah.
starting a regimen
and basically creating a relationship with yourself through these modalities, so you're not just jumping off the cliff, which could happen in a big macro journey if you were not prepared for what that might show you. And so one of the things that there's also said about psilocybin or mushrooms is that it's a non-specific amplifier, which means that it's not specific on what is going to be amplified for you. And especially when you're talking about the brain, being associated to your nervous system and everything about your reality is translated and happens in the mind. So if it's if you're having a really tough day, even though it's working with your serotonin receptors, it doesn't mean you're gonna feel amazing when you take the psilocybin journey. You may, but one doesn't equal the other. Mm-hmm. It's because it's a non-specific amplifier, I've come to realize how it just doesn't matter. And I think Terence McKenna had said it as well, of that basically you have to be willing to look at look at yourself, look at your blockages, look at your struggles or your trauma, and you have to be ready to address these things that may show themselves to you. Mm-hmm. Now, from my experience as well, it's not that you're gonna just be re-traumatized and then be stuck there.
Are you talking about microdosing or macrodosing?
Macrodosing. Okay. And, well, microdosing is the same. It's just in a smaller form, right? You still may have your triggers show up. It doesn't eliminate your triggers, but it gives you an opportunity to create another pathway through it, which is truly healing. Mm-hmm. So in macrodoses, when you're doing a big journey, it's the same thing in a bigger scale. So you may end up having these traumas come up. But there was another doctor who, I'll look for the link. It was on a YouTube video that I was watching. And he was from Johns Hopkins, because they're the one leading medical facility doing the most research right now. Anyway, he was saying about how he uses the stuck, like if you're stuck, that the psilocybin was something that relieves you from being stuck. And so he actually was using that term because he was like, I don't know how else to describe it, but there's the stuckness that people feel, which is the thread that connects somebody that's dealing with PTSD, somebody that's dealing with depression, somebody that deals with anxiety, somebody that's dealing with death, because they're actually usually using it also for people that have terminal cancer, that are on their deathbed, basically, right, dealing with severe depression, and giving it to them. And the through line is the stuck. You're stuck in this framework, in this reality, and you can't see a way out. And so that's where this medicine, because it's opening up all these possibilities, and including your nervous system, which is connected to your heart. So it could be heart opening, feeling, emotions, like all the sensory systems, bringing in information in different ways and being able to then translate it differently. So it's to relieve yourself from being stuck. So what I was saying is that even if your triggers become amplified, if you're having a frustrating day and you have a microdose, you may continue to feel a little frustrated, but there is a through line that takes you through it, where it's like, oh, I feel a little bit of frustration, but I can actually see it. I can see it, as opposed to I am it.
Yeah.
And you can separate yourself from these things, which then allow you to process them differently and just decide, like, actually, I can see that might be triggering over here, so I'm going to go this way. And that becomes a really easy decision. And that's where that buttery soft brain starts to take place, because it's like, oh, I have options now. I'm floating in here.
Yeah, it's interesting, is like the way that I've experienced that stuck, or like moving through the stuckness, is it's like you still feel all of the sensations of the frustration, but you don't sit in it. It's like you're not sitting in a pile of shit anymore. It's like you can notice that you're sitting in the pile of shit and be like, oh, I can stand up and do something different that is not sitting in this pile of shit, right? It's like I'm no longer sitting on the thumbtack. I realize that my pain is coming because I'm sitting on the thumbtack. It's like you can kind of go into the root if you need to know what the root is, or you could just kind of find your way out. But like experiencing the frustration it's not the stuck part of it. Yeah. Yeah. It's like experiencing the frustration and actually having the experience of it, instead of stopping at it and deciding that you can't go any further, is where the stuckness actually like lives or like stays, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So like the mushrooms that's been like super helpful for me in like just seeing it.
Yeah.
becoming aware.
Yeah, and that's where that's where it becomes a medicine.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you have the experience of being able to get through something that you had previously not been able to really get through as easily, that experience is then recorded into your body in a way that is very memorable and can be repeated, and you can feel it. And so a lot of people that take bigger journeys, there's testimonials and research done about people taking larger journeys and coming away with like being able to rid themselves of like cigarette addictions or alcohol addictions because they have a larger experience of the self and are able to reprogram the mind basically in that space to where you come out of it not needing these other things that you may have habitually felt that you may have needed.
Oh yeah, like when I first started hearing about psychedelics, I mean, the first real intentional psychedelic, I will say, that I was in practice with was ayahuasca, because like you, I was like dabbling with mushrooms, but just in that like party zone, and I was like mixing it with alcohol, and it like the effects of it are so different when you mix it with alcohol versus when you're doing it medicinally. And so when I started hearing about psychedelics as medicine, namely through ayahuasca, it's like I was hearing about people doing it for like the reason of releasing themselves of addiction. Because what I was, and this was super controversial back then, I'm sure it still is now, is like one of my friends, her husband or her fiance at the time was an alcoholic for years and was in the program. And so when he made the decision to sit with ayahuasca, it was huge. First of all, I didn't realize how big until more of my friends were part of the program, and how stringent they become on like you not using any substances for help. But like realizing that this was a medicine that could not only take that addiction off of your shoulders, but in a way where it's not, I want to say in a way where it's not like you pretending like it's gone with willpower. It's like it's actually gone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there's a big difference too of like your willpower continuously pushing up against a wall that you can't take down is different than that wall just being gone and now you can just go through. Yeah. And so, and also intention is a huge factor with how this medicine is working with your subconscious. If you have no intention of helping yourself or utilizing it as a medicine or having realizations or really looking deeply into yourself and what you can do to shift and change, if you have no intentions at all and you just kind of want to do it, you kind of go into an escapism, which you may end up having a challenging experience, or you may end up doing just that, just escaping, which means that you're not actually gonna get to the core root of all the things that you actually are looking to escape or to be free of. So shifting how you see whatever it is that you're doing is important. Rather than doing it as an escape to just get high is totally different than going in and being like, I really want to understand my connection to myself in a deeper way, or whatever it is. So I always suggest, I actually say an intention every time I do a microdose as well as a big journey, but I'll talk to my little microdose and say, okay, I want to have a flowy day today and feel ease with all the things that I need to do. And I'll have my intentions every time, and it really does help support where my life force is looking into.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and I think like just having that intention with the microdose, because I didn't start doing that until I met you, and like how you were talking about how you start doing like your process with your clients and like having that intention, it almost allows for like this pathway for your brain to start walking on. Do you know what I mean? It's like, okay, instead of it just being like blah and whatever and I hope it works, it's like, okay, I have this intention, And even if I only take one moment and say it to myself just this once during this day, that like piles up. I feel like it piles up over time. And so you end up moving faster by moving slow.
Right.
Right.
And so back with the microdoses, after doing it for a while, there is this pile up of sorts of continuous improvement in whatever your intention is. Most of the small intentions are leading towards a bigger overall intention of like success, happiness, joy, connection, all of these things that we all really strive for in our life. Your inner being knows what your larger purposes and intentions are. To say out loud or write them down really your intentions every day with your microdoses or just every day, like really help to work with your subconscious to really lay it down. Like, this is what I want. This is what I'm looking for. And so your brain starts to validate itself by looking for evidence that it is working. And with the psilocybin, you can really create quantum leaps in your transformation and evolution. Right now, I currently don't do microdoses consistently, as far as I'm not on a specific regimen all the time. However, when I am about to go through a big transformation, or I know that I'm doing a lot of learning in life, which I am right now, I will do the microdosing around that, because I'm able to learn. You have like these realizations and these aha moments that come, and it feels natural. It feels very consistent in my functioning. I don't feel this deep dives like into depression like I used to, or these super excitable highs where I then crash from. There's none of that is happening. I feel very consistent, very full of life as well in my ability to get through whatever it is that shows up. And I still have, of course, like little things that show up, and then I work through them in a more consistent manner. So what's helpful is creating intentions all the time. Always just have a good intention so that you're with yourself in this process. And also like within your transformation, knowing that there's so much more potential than just the kind of trudging along day to day. There's so much more that's possible. So really pushing boundaries on what it is you really want, as opposed to just being like, it's okay. I'm good to have a good day. You know, like really like what else are you looking for in your life, and looking towards creating those transformations. And that's where this becomes ultimately supportive, because I'm able to learn and then integrate that learning and move forward, and then learn and integrate and move forward. And that happens so quickly, and I'm not going back and having to relearn the same thing again and again, which was common in my functioning before, or just in general, because that's that default zone again, right? Like going back to this default space where you're just like, okay, now I'm just doing my everyday thing. You're like, I did learn that before. Now I have to relearn it again, like feeling frustrated even around that concept. So having support also is really important, regardless of which method you're using. But support, a coach, a therapist, somebody that has a strong mindset to be able to deal with just chatter thoughts and help you process and integrate the realizations that you do have, so that you can actually integrate, like bring that information into yourself, into your functioning, and apply it to your life, so that you can find the joy, the success, and all the things that you're intending for yourself. So that's important also. Microdosing is important as well as macrodosing. Big journeys is really important to have integration time. Integration time with yourself afterwards. Integration time with whomever you're doing the journey with. Integration with a coach or a therapist or somebody else afterwards as well, which will help bring on even more realizations after the fact, because ultimately you have this medicine in your system for a few days, even though the psychedelic journey and a macro journey is experienced within about 4 to 6 hours. And then once that subsides, you're in a place where your mind is still very flexible and very open to suggestion. So being mindful with your thoughts, mindful to give yourself the proper suggestions and remind yourself of the learning that you have experienced so that it can really set into your consciousness as you move through time and away from that experience.
So good.
Yeah.
So like what would you say is like the biggest learning that you've gotten personally from either experience, microdosing and macrodosing? Or the most profound thing, maybe. Yeah.
For microdosing, I think that one of the biggest things that continue to surprise me is just how powerful the medicine is. And not just my experience, but hearing about other people's experiences, like relieving people of nerve pain and eyesight getting better, smelling getting better, right? Just like dreaming again or whatever. It's just like so many profound changes that seem small at first, but when you talk about these changes happening over a long period of time, it could really be life-changing. So for me, it is that consistency in my functioning to where I'm not doing these deep dives into depression, even if I'm not taking them. And that's the point. It's definitely, there's no addictive properties to psilocybin. So it's something that even if you suffer from addiction, it's not an addictive property of a medicine. And I've had people that had opioid addictions that did a bunch of a regimen of mushrooms and were able to just easily set them down and walk away when it was over and they felt ready for that. So what it's been is just that real consistency in my life force, my life force and my attention to want to be present, right? Because as it activates your nervous system and your mind, it creates this beautiful amount of presence to be so excited to live each of these moments, no matter where I'm at or what I'm doing. I'm just like, yes, I'm so excited to be here, or just feel appreciative of being here at all. And oh man, the magic that we are, and oh man, the beauty of the ability to learn this, and oh man, I never thought of it that way. Just the consistent growth that I can feel within myself and my consciousness expanding little by little, as opposed to these big expansions and then kind of coming back into this retraction mode. It very much feels like this nice, consistent, expanding growth that is within my my life force is able to manage it. It's not just overwhelming.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I kind of have this idea of, or this image that popped into my mind as you were speaking of how this growth it feels permanent because it's slower. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes you experience, I don't know if you experience, but I experience quantum leaps of growth in my everyday journeying and my dedication to personal development and personal growth. It's I've experienced these huge quantum leaps where then I'd be like, oh no, what have I done? You know what I mean? And it's almost I kind of want to retract or move backwards, but you can't. It's almost you can't unlearn what you've learned. And I want to say that part of that has to do with practicing with mushrooms and being on microdoses and regularly going in on larger journeys.
Yeah, you know? And the thought about the reason why I do it 4 times a week as opposed to every day a week is because every day there is an amount of receiving or growth. And so if you're thinking about that every day, it's just another realization. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, tomorrow I'm going to do things a little differently. And then just another realization. Oh man, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do things even a little more different. Okay, realization is just okay, give me a break. So there's this amount of, I do it a couple days on and then I'll take a day off and I'll do a couple days on and take a couple days off, that type of thing. And it allows the brain time to just sort of regulate itself so that it's not just this big, okay, I'm just going and it's crazy and I'm learning, and it's just, it gives you this softer move. Others that I have heard taking it 5 times a week, 5 days on, 2 days off, that's really helpful and supportive for really severe situations. And then there's some people that'll do it 30 days straight, and it's just like, wow, that is a lot, and it's a lot of movement and a lot of opening up. And so the difference with the macrodosing as well is macrodosing is a wild experience, first of all, because it's a psychedelic, okay? So there's a lot that we can say about that, and in fact, if you look at our other episodes, we'll go through a bunch of different types of journeys that we've been on. So macrodosing is an amount of getting a lot more of this medicine in your system. So you just like, you open up, your mind is expanding, your body, your brain, how you receive information, how you receive yourself, your consciousness, the barriers and the boundaries of consciousness start to break away, which is something that Terence McKenna had explained. And it's just this wild experience that could go in many different directions. And they're not always pleasant, but they can always be expanding, even in the unpleasantry. And so when you have this big blast of like, oh my gosh, like there's a couple of times where I felt like I was part of this bigger conscious cosmic consciousness, and Amber is a self who exists over here, and wow, I'm excited to play Amber as a role, and da 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 da, like all this great stuff. And then about a week later, you kind of retract.
Yeah.
You go back into your norm, which is good. You don't want to be in this crazy space all the time. That's why it's a journey that you're on, and then you come home. But the thing about it is, like, you can't, you do retract. Your brain, your mind, your nervous system is receiving this abundance of opening and floods of information. And in order to integrate, it takes a lot of time to integrate all the things you may have thought or experienced in that space. And it's like your mind doesn't know how to hold open everything. And so it goes back and retracts. And so some people that only do big journeys and don't microdose, they'll often say, what I hear is, oh, I do a journey once a year or twice a year just for a reset. And it's because you kind of go back into this retracted default mode over time as you get space between you and that journey. But within that first few days, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be the same. And quite often some people aren't ever the same because it's such a shift in perspective that you can't ever unsee it. But there are parts of our functioning that still will go back, and you're like, oh man, yeah. If I really think about it, I can remember. However, you kind of go back to this default. So that's where the microdosing is really special, because you're really able to integrate these learnings in a pace that is more natural for your system in growth, as opposed to just like, and then coming in, it's like, oh my gosh, now I'm different. It's just like that doesn't settle well with the psyche. So being careful with yourself, being mindful with yourself is always important no matter what. Taking care of yourself, set and setting, always make sure you're safe, in a safe place. You feel good about what you're doing. You're consenting to anything you're doing with your body. You're not just giving yourself over to something else. It is you being with you in a very special way. And I think that's the biggest thing with the difference between the two for me.
Yeah. It's big.
It's good. It's big. It's
good.
big. It's big.
Yeah.
All the things.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to tell them?
Yeah, I think that's about it. Just set and setting. Make sure you're utilizing your dosages properly. If you don't know, there's resources out there that could help. It's getting bigger in the grassroots evolution that we're a part of here and there, wherever you are. There's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of movement in the market, and you can check in on the clinical studies, and we're following all the time, like when it becomes legal. And here we are, just doing life, making it work for us.
Yeah.
All
right, until next time.
Yeah, thank you. Follow us check in more for more episodes on our journeys and the wild adventures, and we're gonna be bringing on other people and see how their journeys are, and so we can all just take notes and have a nice big discussion. Yeah, until next time.
Bye.